Hi there, I'm Mango Diaz from TCRAC Modular, and this is Vinia, an 8 audio channels multifunction eurorack module. Each channel can be independently configured as an effect processor, sample player, VCO. We have 8 trigger inputs, 8 CV inputs, 6 audio inputs, and 8 audio outputs. There is also a MIDI TSR input and a micro SD card reader. We've got also 2 encoders and 2 push buttons. Both the encoded clicks and the push button functions are labeled here. Almost all the time left encoded click is selection, buttons are for channel selection, and the right encoder is back. Vinia does not have a ton of instruments or effects, by the way. It has about 10 instruments and 20 effects, but they are useful ones in my opinion. So as audio sources or instruments, we got the audio input, which is for processing external audio, sample players, VCOs, harmonic VCO, car plus, a chord generator, some other stuff, and a pretty cool drum synth. This is the main menu. The Constructor is where we edit the chain of audio elements and processors for each channel, editor, global settings, presets, macros. We will talk later on about this. We have also a mixer, some utilities, and monitor with an oscilloscope and some other stuff like that. The Constructor is the main interface. So if we click on it, we can see the elements on the chain. By clicking on these buttons, we can see other channels too. If one of the slots is selected, by clicking the left encoder, we will enter the editor for that element. And if a connection between 2 slots is selected, by clicking the left encoder, we can add a new processor in between. Other actions can be performed by using the right encoder and the right click, such as replace, move, delete, and bypass. So when we enter the editor, the left encoder will select the parameter and the right encoder will set the value. We don't need to click for that, by the way. And when the name of the element is selected, by tuning the right encoder, we will navigate through the different elements of the chain. In the output section, we have the controls for the send return of the main reverb unit, which is a nice stereo plate reverb, which is shared by all channels. Of course, individual mono reverb units can be inserted at any point of any channel. We have also here the gain for the audio input and also the attack and decay for the envelope follower of the audio input. As you can see here, after the output section, each channel has an envelope generator, an LFO, and a mini sequencer. These are for modulation, and each channel has them. And of course, by clicking here, we can edit any other channel. By clicking with the left encoder on any parameter in the editor, we will enter the modulation settings. Here we can go to any element of the chain, any parameter of the selected element, the modulation source, CV inputs, envelopes, the LFOs, sequences, envelope followers of the audio inputs, the macros, which will be explained later on, few random sources, MIDI CCs, and of course we got a MIDI learn. Here we can set the modulation amount, which can be positive or negative, and the sample and hold option. When set to on, the modulation will be applied only when a trigger is sent to the channel's trigger input. Let's have a look to only a few of these instruments. Here we have the VCO, the waveforms, the bass pitch, the quantizer, which can be off. You can use the global scale, and also it can be set to a custom one. The amplitude, if we plan to modulate this heavily, using a VCA will give us better results. And these are the audio rate modulation parameters for the VCO. Unlike the type of modulation we have seen previously, where any source of any channel can modulate almost any parameter, the audio rate modulation is only available in a few parameters of a few instruments and effects, and everything will happen within the same channel. The modulation sources are the audio input, the envelope and the LFO of the channel where the instrument or the effect is placed. For the VCO, we can set the modulation target to frequency, or phase. There is another parameter which has audio rate modulation on the VCO, and is the shape. It will have effect only with the triangle and the pulse waveforms. With the triangle waveform, it will go saw to triangle to ramp. With the pulse waveform, we will have pulse width modulation. We've got also audio rate modulations in the filters. The VCA, which is bipolar, so we can do ring modulation with it.
Pero bueno, este segundo maestro tenía una especie de incontinencia urinaria, que yo tampoco voy a meter porque yo ya a mis 40 años me levanto todas las noches. Claro, yo tengo los me tengo que andar.
The wave folder. We have two sample players. One plays WAV files directly from the micro SD card, and the other one will use the samples stored in the internal flash chip. The size of this chip is only 16 megabytes, so we have some limitations here. But this flash player has a pretty good performance. The parameters are sample selection, and pitch. When modulating the sample selection, the maximum range is not the amount of samples available on the micro SD card or the internal memory. Instead, it's limited to 127. In this example, the sample selection is being modulated by the mini sequencer. Chords is another instrument. It's a 4-voice chord generator. We have the waveform, the scale source to generate the chord, which can be the project or a custom one. With this, we can do things like having the chords in pure minor while the melody uses the pentatonic scale. Or vice versa, using Vinia's internal quantizers only. Other parameters of the chord generator are the inversion, which basically shifts the lower voice 1 octave up, the level of the voices, and interval, which is a more experimental parameter. What this controls is the minimum distance between the voices on the chord in semitones. So when set to 3, which is a minor third, we will get the usual tonic third 5/7 chord with all the diminished or augmented variations if they exist in the scale. Setting this to 5, for example, will make chords with 4th intervals. The drum synth is made of 2 oscillators, filters, envelopes, VCAs, and noise. We have 3 models with our classic, FM, and ring. Pitch, waveform. This is the level of the first oscillator. And this is the second. This is the decay of the amplitude envelope, the filter mode, which can be high pass, band pass, and low pass, the cutoff of the filter, the resonance, the decay of the modulation envelope, the amount of that mod envelope that affects the pitch, and the cutoff, the amount of noise, the decay of the noise envelope, and the noise color. So there are two versions of each model. In the second one, the noise is always processed by the oscillator filter. This is the classic model, which has the two oscillators tuned in a perfect fifth. FM, in this one, the second oscillator will modulate the frequency of the first one, so tuning up its level will increase the modulation amount. And ring, where the second oscillator modulates the amplitude of the first one. In this one, the second oscillator level will indeed increase the pitch for it. The global settings are saved with the project. Here we have things like the key and the project scale. The tempo, Vinia doesn't have a clock generator, but this project tempo can be used to sync the time of the delays and the parameters of the main reverb. Also, we have the channel settings where we can set the stereo pairs and also copy and paste channels, which is pretty handy. And last item in the global settings is the trigger delay. This parameter allows us to control the time that passes between when the trigger is detected until it is processed, which is very convenient since many sequences have a delay at the volt per octave output compared to the gate one. With the preset section, we can load and save presets, which are the whole Vinia's configuration, all chains of all channels, macros, global settings. But also we can load and save individual channels only. Macros are modulation sources which can behave non-linearly and which can be controlled by other modulation sources. There are 8 macros with 8 layers each. Edit will access the interface of the macro layers. The curve displayed here defines how the layer will behave. Default behavior is linear, but the curve can be modified. So we can go to any macro here, any of the layers. The push buttons will select the marks, which are the points used to define the curve. Each layer can have a maximum of 8 marks. We can change the position of the selected mark and of course set the value, which by the way can be negative too. We can also add new marks and delete them. With macro assign, we can set what is going to control the macro. In this example, the macro is being controlled by an envelope. Macros are also useful when we want several parameters to be controlled by the same modulation source, even if that modulation is going to be linear. Because if we want to change the modulation source for them, instead of navigating all these parameters to set that, it has to be done only one time by setting the macro assign. Vinia has a mixer that can be activated here. Now outputs 7 and 8 are the stereo mixer outputs. The controls are volume, balance, reverb send, which is pre-fader, and mute. Except for channel 7 and 8, all outputs still behave the same as individual channel outputs. In the Utilities section, we have a scale editor. The 20 system scales can be visualized here in the key of C, and we can edit any of the 10 user scales. Changes made here needs to be saved to make them persistent. The long press action allows us to customize what will happen when any of the 4 buttons is kept pressed. These are to manage the sample stored in the flash memory, calibration tools, and here we can rotate the display, so the module can be mounted with the connections on top or bottom, depending on your needs or preference. Monitor is the section where we have the oscilloscope, the left encoder is the vertical zoom, and the right one is the horizontal zoom. Clicking the left encoder will turn the trigger detection on and off. And of course, we can inspect any channel by using the push buttons. We have a tuner also, pretty basic, and some other stuff to check the LFOs, CV inputs, envelope followers, and performance. So that's all for now. Thanks for watching.